Hello and welcome to the Super Show. This week I am your host Alex Jones, and joining me as always is the effervescent, the ever glowing Jamie. So Hello Jamie.
Hello everyone. My headphones were way too fucking loud and you just blew my eardrums out, so thank you for that.
I wonder how many other people listening out there in podcast land have had the same experience. I've just blown their eardrums. I apologise.
That's right.
I'll try to not blow the eardrums again. Hello, everyone, though. It's an exciting new week. It's time to talk about video games again. We don't have any Chris with us this week, although I'm pretty sure he said he was going to be here last week, but he got his dates a little bit muddled up. He is doing the important work of actually working, so that's why he's not with us. But I'm sure Jamie and I can keep you entertained with some game news that's come out this last week. It's been a bit of a rubbish one, Jamie, hasn't it, though? It's not been the most...
It's one of those, we always have those weeks, well, I say we sometimes have those weeks where we're about to convene to discuss what we're going to talk about on the podcast that week, and we kind of have that moment where if we were there in person, we'd look each other in the eye and give a knowing nod, and it's the nod of, there's no major news stories this week. And this was one of those weeks. We had about 15 mini headlines that if this podcast was just about saying the nature of the news and then leaving, we'd be fine. But we get down and dirty. That's the issue.
We do, although there is one story that I'm excited to get to because I love getting down and dirty with it, and that is, of course, some juicy goss around Abandoned from Blue Box Games, which I'm sure... I reckon it's like 50-50. I reckon half people are bored to death with it and don't want to ever hear about it again, and half the people are super excited about it and they just want to hear more and more news.
I think I agree. It's probably 50-50, although... Hopefully we can convert a few people this week, because I think on the kind of the scale of not juicy to juicy, this is I'd say this is 80 to 85% of the way towards maximum juiciness, depending on how much weight you put in the words of certain online individuals.
And it's got nothing to do with Kojima, which is the most interesting part.
Yes, exactly. For once, it's not just trying to peddle more Kojima Silent Hill conspiracies, although there are plenty of Silent Hill conspiracies that we will also discuss this week.
Yes, talking about Silent Hill, that is the first news story that we're going to get onto today. But before we do that, I'm quickly going to mention the fact that we are on YouTube and podcasting platforms. We are at Supershow Pod. If you want to go reach out to us on Twitter or on YouTube, and you want to say hello, you want to drop us a little comment, we are across all the podcasting platforms. But we are also, Jamie, we are on Paisley Radio, because we're internet radio superstars. We're on there 10 p.m. on Thursdays, 10 p.m. on Mondays when it's repeated. So if you want to check us out in sort of like a bit of an old school style by listening to us pseudo live, make sure you head over there and check it out. Also, get onto Twitter and DM Chris, because he loves it. Drop him a cheeky little DM. Yeah. He's the only one who has access to our DM. So like I said, at Supershow Pod, send him a little message to say, how's the work going? Or, send him a picture of something. Yeah. Risque. It's up to you.
I am not going anywhere near that Twitter or that inbox, because every now and then I'm in some WhatsApp groups, let's just say, that are a little bit dodgy. Not dodgy in terms of necessarily the makeup of the WhatsApp group or the intentions behind the WhatsApp group. It's just, you get enough blokes in one forum, then weird shit starts to happen, or there's always that one weird guy who finds things funny when they're really not. And so much of it comes from Twitter nowadays. And I apologize in advance for anyone that goes down this rabbit hole, but thanks to Twitter and an unspecified WhatsApp group, I was introduced to Naked Martin this week. And he is... as his name might suggest, a fascinating fellow.
Naked Martin.
I'll search that name at your own, be very wary. Because all I'll say is the name Naked Martin kind of gives you an indication of something to expect, but it goes nowhere near selling the whole image or the entire makeup of Naked Martin. It sells him massively short based on what he does.
Right.
And I didn't give any consent to watch. So, Jonesy, I'll put it I'm going to say it. I didn't give my consent to watch a man shit on a piece of bread and eat it, but that's what happened.
Right. No, do you know what the problem is now? You spent too long before you mentioned his name to when you mentioned what he did. That 90% of our audience already looked up Naked Martin.
I told them not to look up Naked Martin. Please don't look up Naked Martin.
That just makes it more exciting.
Although,
and what you did was you left it the perfect length of time, the Google length of time, and now they've already been exposed. I'm lucky because I'm here on the podcast and I wasn't compelled to like immediately type it in. So.
And let us know in the comments below if, in the time between my introduction of Naked Martin and my explanation of what Naked Martin does, you looked him up. And also let us know if you're going to be sending those tweets and their attached videos to Chris in the Supershow DMs at SupershowPod.
Because then he'll have no idea what it's about as well. He'll be like, what the hell?
He just gets inundated with Naked Martin content.
Naked Martin. Do you know what? When you said a certain WhatsApp group and you were introducing Naked Martin, I half expected it to be some weird thing that had been created by someone to do with our friend Martin from the Just Interesting podcast.
Oh, God. Yeah, no. That version of Naked Martin would just be like a rogue Just Interesting fan who just photoshops Martin's head onto naked buff men's bodies and shares the images. Also worth a follow.
Yes.
Luck would have it.
Yeah, absolutely. But you know what? Hey, Twitter is good for something else as well, other than weird stuff and finding weird stuff. It's also good for rumours, Jamie.
Can't get enough of those rumours.
Can't get enough of the rumours. And the one game that always keeps on giving, or the one series, I should say, is, of course, Silent Hill. And this week, Silent Hill rumours have been bubbling up again because those cheeky little insiders and leakers, as they always do, predicting the return of Silent Hill, it seems to have gained a little more traction in the last week and actually seems to have been confirmed to some degree that Silent Hill may be seeing more than one game, might be seeing a few entries in the Silent Hill sort of universe popping up. So there was a Twitter user called Dusk Golem who shared some images that allegedly come from 2020, a new version of Silent Hill that he was then copyright striked by Konami, which kind of gives you an idea. I always find that weird because if you want to kind of confirm that the leak is real, copyright strike it. If you want to pretend it's fake, then maybe don't and just go like, I don't know what this is.
It's the Streisand effect, isn't it? Like, the harder you try and get something off the internet, the more attention you're drawing to it in the process.
Right, yes, absolutely.
Like, what Konami really should have done is quote-tweeted Dusk Golem and just put the crying laughing emoji. Like, publicly humiliate him, and then no one will take him seriously.
Yeah, which is absolutely the way to go. That is the way to go. Don't copyright strike it. Just do laughing face emoji and be like, oh, this is so funny. I love whoever made this. But...
Why are Konami German all of a sudden? Do that voice again?
Oh, I don't know. This is so funny.
It's like you think Bruno, like Sacha Baron Cohen's Bruno, works for Konami.
That's just my go-to. German is apparently my go-to at the moment.
Oof, mein Silent Hill.
That's what I imagine when you said like a laughing crying face on Twitter. Like them just going, oh, I love your tweet. It's so funny. But
you've got a weird idea of Germans, but I love it.
I'm just getting sidetracked. But after that tweet, there was a podcaster called Nate the Hate who then tweeted to say that multiple Silent Hill projects are actually in development. So we're not talking old 2020 stuff which hasn't come out. We're talking currently in development at the moment, including a mainline entry, a side story, and a Silent Hill 2 remake by Bloober Team. That would be a timed exclusive for PlayStation. So this is obviously getting a little closer to what people were hoping because people want some more Silent Hill. They always want more Silent Hill. But it does seem that our little friend Jeff Grubb has kind of managed to confirm that some of these rumours are, what do we like to call a confirmed rumour maybe? And that he's been hearing that this stuff is actually real and isn't just a rumour. It's a confirmed rumour-ish.
Exactly. Like Jeff Grubb, VGC and Eurogamer, the three horsemen of the confirmed rumors apocalypse, have corroborated this in quotation marks, whatever, like, take it for what it's worth, because I don't know how you feel about this stuff and how you even feel about Silent Hill, because even I have to chickadee check myself sometimes when it comes to this series, because we've been talking about it in vague terms for so long, but even with the weirdness around Konami and their seeming lack of the lack of interest they've shown to developing video games in general over the last couple of years, let alone, capitalizing on the brand recognition they still have in so many of their franchises, is that I just always felt like it was an inevitability that Silent Hill was going to come back. Even after Silent Hills fell through, even after Konami, got mental about PT and wiped it from the planet, for the face of the earth, like everything that happened, it still felt like Silent Hill was going to come back eventually. I think the only thing that's interesting here is how many people are willing to corroborate the story that there are potentially as many as, depending on who you talk to and who you listen to, 3 or 4 different Silent Hill games in development at once, which goes full circle and then all of a sudden does seem kind of anti-Konami again. Like, I'll believe that they're making one. Do I believe that they're making 4? It's a jump.
It's kind of like if you're going to... People for years have been waiting for something Silent Hill related, and to wait that long and then to be like, say, oh, no, we've got 3 or 4 things coming out, that does seem like a little bit too much of a jump. I believe one, or maybe like I believe a remake, like a Silent Hill 2 remake, and then something else. But yeah, 3 or 4 seems a little bit strong.
Well, yeah,
that's like a Star Wars or a George Lucas level of...
Right, exactly. And again, like if Konami were a company or a publisher that had spent the last, let's say, decade or two flaunting all their franchises and, milking them for everything they're worth, that it would make sense that they were Star Warsing this shit. But they've done the opposite. They've sat on names like Silent Hill, like Metal Gear, like Castlevania. And don't get me wrong, there have been examples of times where they've kind of cashed in on the IP, or at least put out a low effort entry in those series. Like you go back to Metal Gear Survive, which was Konami's attempt to flirt with the idea of Metal Gear post Kojima, and it didn't work. So like there have been examples, again in the last decade or so, of Konami not wanting to leave money on the table, but Silent Hill was always just this weird anomaly where it was like they felt for years like the company that were happy to say, that's cool, like we're making billions of dollars with pachinko machines and setting up casinos and resorts, like we don't need to make a fucking a new Contra game. But now they, like, if you believe the rumblings, they might be coming closer and closer to kind of being back in business. And actually, the key thing about this, no matter how you feel about Bloober Team and their recent works, is they're finally acknowledging, which they should have done prior to things like Metal Gear Survive and the last Contra game, that they might not be the best people for the jobs when it comes to these new titles. And they're actually leveraging the popularity of those franchises and those IPs, but giving them to more talented people, to put it bluntly, is a smart way to go.
Yes, no, absolutely. I think it's also a weird one, though, because from our perspective, obviously, we talk about Silent Hill and we say, everyone gets really excited about it, and every time it bubbles up, everyone sort of goes, this is it, Silent Hill, Silent Hill. I do wonder if there's a part of Konami where they sort of look at each other and go, wow, there's like 10,000 people online who are getting all excited about Silent Hill again, but we've passed that. That's in our past now. We don't really care. Like you said, like we're onto pachinko machines. We've moved on. We're not that bothered. But
I also wonder if it's like a kind of a weird skepticism, almost like an old school skepticism of like, okay, there's now this new wave of people on the internet who have anime profile pictures and love going on Twitter and talking about how much they like old games. But do they look at that market as one that doesn't actually spend that much money on these products? And like, do they see there being a disconnect between what in a vacuum could look like an outpouring of support for a series, but in reality doesn't translate to sales? I've always wondered that, especially when you like tie that into sort of like the Eastern developers and Japanese publishers and developers have always traditionally been a little bit more cautious when it comes to what they greenlight and what they release and when and how and so on and so forth. They're not as gung-ho.
No, they don't. They definitely don't seem to be. But it is also that thing of where the way they actually make their money. That's the big thing, isn't it? Is because of the way that we as players think they make their money is obviously one thing, but then they might make most of their money in a completely random way that they're much more bothered about other stuff that we have no idea. It's like that thing of someone saying like McDonald's. How does McDonald's make their money? Oh, they sell burgers. No, they don't. They're actually in the real estate business, and that's how they make their money.
Yeah,
which is like it's completely different area. So maybe Konami are like, oh man, like you can get all excited about and rose tinted glasses about Silent Hill all you want, but we're never going to make another one because that's not where you make our money. But
right, but and they even sorry to jump on what you were saying almost about them looking at the kind of the broader multimedia side of things. There was that time where they infamously did an unbelievably good job completely remaking all the cutscenes and cinematics from Metal Gear Solid 3, but it was for a pachinko machine. It wasn't for a game.
Yes, yeah, like they're like saying their head is just in a different place. But having said all of that, and having like maybe sort of putting a bit of a dampener on it, it does sound like people are pretty convinced that this is going to happen because, as you were saying, Eurogamer's Vicky Blake has basically said Bloober Team are definitely working on something Silent Hill related, and the sources for VGC have said that the images that were leaked by Dust Golem were from a PT-style teaser codenamed Sakura, and the episodic side stories might well be published by Annapurna Interactive. So
Yeah.
So it sounds legit. It sounds like there is something in the works. It sounds like I might be seeing something coming up in the future.
I mean,
so maybe.
Like,
maybe this is Jamie. Maybe this is really it.
You know what? I think it is it. I think we go back and forth on this podcast, and I'm sure lots of people go back and forth with us on, you know, the state of insiders and leakers and rumor mongers in the industry nowadays, because they seem more prominent than ever, but depending on who you ask, less reliable than ever. But I think when you're talking about VentureBeat, when you're talking about VGC, you're talking about Eurogamer, you are talking about websites that traditionally don't risk their reputation on rumors unless they word them very carefully. Like, hey, we've heard this, but we're not sure. But like when the words like corroborated are being thrown around, and, you know, a Eurogamer journalist is saying X is definitely working on Y, and VGC are throwing out code names, like, it suggests that it is real. But the only thing that remains to be seen is, and this is the fascinating thing about the games industry that I think not that many people actively acknowledge, and it's very hard to kind of use and talk about, because it sounds like a safety net that people who do share these bits of information are trying to use. But just because this could all be true and nothing still might happen. Like, video game plans and video game development, things chop and change all the time. Like, those screenshots might be real. That teaser might have been codenamed Sakura. It might have been planned to be a PT-style teaser for a Silent Hill 5. And yet nothing might happen publicly, and it would all still be true. I think that's where there's a disconnect, where people are like, so-and-so lied about this. Like, they might not have. Like, but video game development is extremely complicated and plays out over many years. Yeah, it's
and that is where you get the situation like happened with Nintendo and the Switch Pro, where they that you get some really weird situation where it was like, this is definitely happening, and then Nintendo like, don't know what you're talking about, mate. And like, I think in years to come we'll find out that that was true, and that for some reason they changed their plans. Usually, like you were saying about corroboration, so I think the journalistic standard is usually that you get two independent sources who can corroborate a story, and then that means that you can go out there and you can publish it. And they've definitely got that, it seems, for this Silent Hill stuff. Maybe not quite so much backing for the story about abandoned and blue box games that we're going to talk about in a little bit, because that's a little bit more.
Maybe. Can I ask you something that I'm curious about before we move on from Silent Hill?
Yep.
Because sometimes it feels like when rumours like this pick up enough steam and get discussed enough, and they keep floating around and they're in the ether for years, they kind of get a life of their own. And I sometimes wonder if there's this weird effect where people get more excited for a property than they actually are as a result of like the anticipation, the excitement of something continually nearly. It's like edging and being blue ballsed for years for Silent Hill, making you think you want Silent Hill more. Silent Hill 2 is often cited as, you know, the peak of that series. It was critically acclaimed. It's the title that's allegedly being remade of all of the titles they have to choose from. Like, I'm 29 now. I was 8 when Silent Hill 2 came out. I was not playing Silent Hill 2. As someone who's like slightly older, like, what was your recollection of Silent Hill 2? Its reputation amongst like you and your friends at the time, how it fit into the Alone in the Dark Resident Evil picture, and do you think it makes sense that people care this much?
It was non-existent.
Right. Okay. Yeah, that's what I thought you would say.
I had one mate who had Silent Hill 1. I think. So I don't even remember. Like, so my only exposure then, so I guess I was like maybe like 17, 18, something like that. Yeah, so it was that a mate had it, and it was, I can't, all I remember is the opening level is is it the mum walking around the town like calling the kid's name, and it's all foggy, and the graphics are horrendous, and like, well, they're not bad, but like the pop-in is obviously so bad that they just have fog everywhere.
Yes.
And you can't see anything. And I think I played that section of the game. I don't even know which one it is, Silent Hill 1 or 2. Like, you can tell how much I've paid attention to it over the years. And you kind of, and then you go down some stairs, and that's like when the game kind of starts, and you go down to like Horrible World or whatever. That is my extent of what I actually played. My recollection is that the film came out, which I also didn't watch.
Yep.
I played Alone in the Dark. I watched, but not much of it again. Never owned it, played it with a mate. And then I watched the film with Christian Slater, which I think is more of my exposure to that. Resident Evil was one that everyone played. Resident Evil was like the games we all played and we loved them. They were terrifying and amazing. I think the last time I seriously tried to play a Resident Evil game before the remakes was Raccoon City, which was so bad that I never went back to Resident Evil until the remakes. And those films are terrible, although they are the most successful movie franchise from games I think ever. But so yes, no, for me, Silent Hill 100% is a hindsight phenomenon.
Interesting.
I was not involved anyway at the time, even though I was probably the right age for it. I couldn't even tell you what I was playing at the time. Probably Prince of Persia trilogy,
GTA
followed by
3.
God of War trilogy, definitely GTA. Like, yeah, I wasn't paying attention to horror games back then.
Interesting. Yeah, no,
It's all post, like you'll say, it's all post everything happening. It was, it's all like a. I was just trying to think, but of course the what's the Nintendo game, the little plinky plunky one where you walk around the island chopping down
Animal
apples
Crossing.
and trees. Animal Crossing is my favorite example of a game that was for no reason became this thing which was bigger than it ever deserved to be. And then it came out and was everywhere. Like, no one mentioned Animal Crossing, I swear, until like the hype train started. And then the online hype got so big that when it just sold an insane number of units and became like insanely successful out of nowhere. And I think Silent Hill is probably one of the series that kind of started that idea of like the online hype train sort of building and building and building. Although saying that, of course, it's got to be Half-Life 3, which is probably the originator of that whole thing, right? Like the sort of online hype, building and building.
I mean, yeah, I get what you
happens,
mean. I get what you mean. I think Half-Life was a particularly weird one because, well, again, like they're all weird ones because what I'm trying to separate here is like my lived experience and the experience that I've witnessed online. Because my lived experience is similar to yours, where I didn't grow up. Admittedly, the age thing didn't help, but there were Silent Hill games that still came out as I, got older, and I didn't grow up as either myself or friends playing Silent Hill games. We played Resident Evil games. We played but I was 11 when Resident Evil 4 came out. That was fine. Like I bought that and played it. I had it on GameCube. But like Silent and Animal Crossing the same, but then I wouldn't have said that any of us were necessarily in the demographic for Animal Crossing, and also for as popular as a lot of the Nintendo handhelds were over the years, and Nintendo consoles in general were over the years, they weren't always popular amongst my cohorts, the people I was at school with, and so on and so forth. And so sometimes I don't know, and Half-Life is, I guess, also fits into that, is like, did I live in my own little echo chamber until I turned 16, 17, 18, and everything I started to consume on YouTube, podcasts, online became gaming related, and then all of a sudden I became almost more aware than I ever thought I'd be about Silent Hill 2 and its reputation and so on and so forth. So I don't know.
I almost feel like the reason I put them all in a similar bracket, like Animal Crossing, which is a weird one to put in there, I know, but like Half-Life, Silent Hill, is because it feels like the online appetite for anything to do with them just kind of massively outshines the actual desire to play those games. But then Animal Crossing.
Yeah, the thing about Animal Crossing is that the numbers were real, right? Like the sale,
that's true.
And there were a number of other factors in that, lockdowns around the world and a global pandemic being a big part of it. But you're right, like there is a weird thing there where I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I'm sure if you looked at the sales of the Animal Crossing title before, is it New Horizons? That was the most recent one. If you looked at the sales of the one before, which I think would have been a 3DS title, I'm sure it jumped up. I don't even know. I don't even want. I was going to say 4 or 5 times, but yeah, maybe it was tenfold. I don't even know. And it's like when you look at something like that, it's not like because we spent the years in between those two Animal Crossing titles becoming increasingly obsessed with Animal Crossing, but there is a little bit of that, and that will probably.
What if it is? What if the whole thing is the companies, like, and what if they do it on purpose with something like Silent Hill? There is a team who work for Konami whose sole purpose over the years is every time that the Google Trends it starts to slip off, they just seed out some stories, some cheeky little leaks to bubble it up again, because they know they're planning to release something in like 5-10 years time, whenever. But they're like, you can't let the audience forget. So they're a team who's like, just squeeze a few little tidbits out there, some information. Just keep it churning.
I'm going to go one step further, and I'm going to say, while I don't think that's impossible, I don't think they need to do that, because I think human beings are stupid enough to do it. We do it ourselves, and we do it inside our own heads. Like, I was going down a weird route the other day, and I was like Googling stuff alongside this to try and find like what the psychological studies were about it. And I found that and this isn't true of all games, but it is true of some, where I have a similar relationship with them in my mind, the games I played in years past, as I have with some relationships. And there are some relationships that you remember as being horrible. You remember all the bad shit. You remember how crazy they were, and you're thankful to be done with it. But there are also relationships that, again, speaking for myself here, I don't know if this is consistent with other people, but in spite of the fact that they were far from perfect, and like on a day-to-day basis, at times they were even bad, or in like a bad place for either one of you two to be. Like, over time, the thing that's crystallized have been the positive memories, and you end up thinking of that person or that time or those or the good times really fondly, and you don't sweat the small stuff at all. Like, you completely forget the fact that you argued every night, and you just remember that great holiday you went on. And I do that sometimes with games.
Yeah, that's really common though. Like, you romanticize the good points and you forget the bad.
I think we do that with games. And I think that the further away we get from them, the more the good parts and the fond memories we have of those games crystallize. And I think they merge with other people's positive experience. And then we also do this by osmosis. We take on opinions that were never ours to begin with. And before you know it, like a good, take that back, a very good horror game from over 20 years ago soon becomes like, what it is now.
It's strange as well, because you almost want to, like, for example, we talked a number of times on the pod about like Demon Souls and the remake for the PlayStation 5, and how they had to kind of keep it true to the original whilst updating the graphics and things. They managed to do that, but in a lot of these games, you wouldn't want to go anywhere near the original. It's effectively just becomes the IP, and you have to make a completely new game, completely new like mechanics, completely new like engine and everything. Because if you actually tried to use influences from the previous version, it'd be a terrible game, because we romanticize the graphics at the time. We remember how good they were, even though they were trash. Yeah. We remember how good the controls were, even though they were trash. And it's like, it's a very strange thing, I think, that we do. Yeah. But one that always springs to mind for me was, as we just talked about, Half-Life. So, right, Half-Life, I actually played the first one when it came out. Was never really online in those days. I can't remember when it would have actually came out, but played it. I can't remember why we even got it. Like, it was a bit left field, but played it and was so blown away by the opening of that game that I remember when people would come around to my house, I would make them play the opening of Half-Life, because I'd be like, look how amazing this game is. It's so like atmospheric and exciting. And so that's always stuck with me, how good that game was for so maybe it's those feelings, those sort of, like you said, romanticize those moments in your life, and you're like, I just want that back.
I had it this week with Disco Elysium, where I ended up watching a YouTube video about Disco Elysium, and it talked about like the soundtrack, it talked about a few other elements, and I sat there and I went, like, I almost started contemplating myself. Like, I remember liking Disco Elysium an awful lot. I remember thinking it was one of my top 3 games that I played that year. But now I'm sitting here thinking like, oh my God, is Disco Elysium one of my favorite games of all time? Like, I can almost feel my like impressions of it, my feelings on it, actually like warming as I sat there watching someone else, be reverent about it. And it's weird.
That's it's true. That happens. Exactly, that thing happens. I think it happens to all of us, for sure. But we can't just reminisce, Jamie, ad nauseum, because we have to move on. But one thing I do want to reminisce about, is how often we've been on the podcast, because we were talking about this, last week, and we were the week before, I think it was, and we were talking about how often we're on that. We were reminiscing, if you like, how much we were on this podcast and how many shows we've done now that we're up to. I think it's 123 episodes we're up to.
That's correct.
Mindful Pig, the absolute legend, one of our patrons, has done the daunting task of going back through all of those podcasts and actually logging who has been on how many episodes. And he's actually managed to get some numbers together for us. I'm going to give the viewers on YouTube, I'll say, And what you can do is, if you're listening to the podcast as well, I'm going to give you a couple of moments before I tell you to try and just guess who has been on the most, or sorry, I should say who has missed the most shows out of all of us, because Mindful Pig has actually got the numbers. So out of 123 shows, how many shows do you think me, Jamie and Jonesy have missed? Now, you might get an inkling because Chris isn't here this week, so that might be a bit
I've also just realised that because Chris is not here this week, I need to do this and make one quick amendment and, and add a number to Chris's pile.
All right, and I'm not going to go like least to most, because I think that, so as in like the person who's been here least, the person who's been here most, because I think that would be the wrong way around. I'm going to go in reverse. I'm going to start with the person who has missed the least number of shows, and no one is going to be surprised to learn that that is you, Jamie. Of course, you have missed 2 only.
Yeah,
2 shows since we started doing this nearly 2 years ago. That is massively impressive, Jamie. So, thank you very much. Thank you for your service.
No, thank you for. I don't even know. Thank you for thanking me, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Thank you for acknowledging me. It's kind of frightening because that's 123 weeks is not a small amount of time, and to have only missed 2 episodes in that, it feels freaky.
That is very, very impressive. And at number 2 is me, of course. I've missed 10 episodes.
See, that's not bad.
Out of those 100, I want to mention that out of 123, I've missed 10. I think I missed 5 or 4 because of having COVID. So if I hadn't have had COVID, this would have only been about 6 that I would have missed, or 5 that I would have missed. So not too bad.
Yeah. If we'd done it at like the start of the year, you'd have been fine.
Chris is on is slightly higher up. So Chris has missed 21 of those 123 episodes, but bless him, he is the sickest man I think I've ever known. So it doesn't help.
He gets ill like no one's business. He also has a real passion for taking jobs in other parts of the country.
He does, yeah. Which when it sort of doesn't work, when it coincides with recording, obviously it doesn't lend itself very well. He's usually on a train, or he's in a little hotel room or something with his laptop that he tells us is absolutely amazing, but he's had it for 15 years, so it's probably slowing down. Probably couldn't handle the podcast.
Yeah, he smiles through gritted teeth as he plays Elden Ring at 3 frames a second.
Yeah, absolutely. But no, thank you, Mindful Pig, for doing that. So that is a slog to go through, I'm sure, but you did it, and we're grateful that you did. It's nice to know that Jamie is the king of turning up, as it were. But as I said, Mindful Pig is one of our patrons who supports us over at patreon.com. And there are other people who support us over there because they're absolute legends. And so I would like to read out a few of their names. You'll notice that there are some names on screen right now, but I'm going to mention a few more. They are Aaron Cameron, Athletic Gravy, Bill Caesar, Brimstone, Cole K, Helium Joker, Ice Not Rock Salt, Jesper Camdown Nielsen, Leo Murger, Mindful Pig, Mr. Anthropic, Nathan Pears, Neil de Geld's Dream of Prosthetic Moustaches Daniel, Pastors Guild, Scary Omens, Starfall Kid, The Ballless Beauty, The Gorgeous Gelding, The Yummy Eunuch, The One and Only Mark Clancy, and then it is the big dogs. It is Brett Z, aka Shellshock, Doppler, Geometric Potter, Hacksaw Bookread, Manuel Guerrero, Peaswad, and this is the one I fear. It's Mogne, May Your Cock Never Burn, Mikkelsen. Thank you so much to all of you. Thank you for supporting us. Thank you for keeping the lights on, keeping us coming back week after week. We couldn't do it without you. And thank you to everyone that comments on the video, that listens to us on podcasting platforms, that downloads us, streams us, listens to us on Paisley Radio, all of those things. You are all absolute legends.
I will just say, Jonesy, to briefly commenting on your fear, that I actually did hear from the artist formerly known as The Uncaged after last week's episode, and he said, I got an A++ for effort on the name. And he said, you did get it almost completely right, by the way. Although I cannot remember what I said last week, so I'm not going to repeat it.
I'm going to go back and listen now, and I'm going to record it, and I'm going to learn it.
There you go. We're honing in.
Yeah, I actually smash it. I reckon we should do a little brief catch up for what we've been playing since last week, Jamie.
Let's do
I know
it.
that you've been playing something new.
I have been playing some. It was something new to me. I think it actually came out a couple of months ago, but it's been sitting on Game Pass for a little while, and I heard enough stories here or there that I finally decided to jump in and play only I think an hour or two of a game called Norco, which is a point-and-click adventure game set in it's like an alternate take on a city called Norco that I believe is in Louisiana. I might have got that wrong. But yeah,
I was going to try and do the accent. I don't know how they talk in Louisiana.
I've got no
Louisiana?
fucking clue either. And there's no voice acting in this game, so playing Norco will not help you when it comes to the accent either. It's a really interesting game. So it's basically as I said, it's a point and click adventure game where you play as a young-ish woman called Kay who returns to her childhood home of Norco, Louisiana, following the death of her mother. And she goes to kind of basically return home like people do when someone dies, and there's situations going on around the circumstances surrounding the death of her mother and the whereabouts of her brother and so on and so forth. And so a bit of a mystery sort of unfolds, but it is, when I say it's set in an alternate take on the real place of Norco, Louisiana, it's very alternate. It's kind of got a weird sci-fi feel, and it's it reminds me, you know how Disco Elysium had this thing where they were human characters, and they had, they talked the way we talk, and they had the same, they cared about the same things we care about, and the same aspirations and emotions and so on and so forth, and the same problems, but they were set in a world. Well,
all except for Kuno.
Apart from Kuno's in a world of his own, yeah, no comparisons there. But there was this weird element on the world side of things where it was hard to track what was consistent with what the world, where we live, and what was consistent to the world of Disco Elysium. Little things like, obviously, fashion and culture was different, and language was different in some cases, and it's got their own locations and their own religions, and the cars are different, and it was where does one stop and the other begin? Norco's got a bit of that going on where again, you're in this kind of Louisiana town that's basically built in, well, I don't know if it was built in or it happened the other way around, the shadow of this big sort of oil processing facility that, pumps smoke and pollution into the air, and that everyone is basically used to living in the shadow of this big plant, this oil plant, and the glow of it, the hum of it, it's part of their lives. But then you walk out into the back garden and there's a robot sitting there, and you're immediately this, there aren't, don't get me wrong, there aren't robots in Disco Elysium, but immediately you're this is a game that's going to kind of blur the lines between what is completely normal in our world and what is this alternate setting. And setting is kind of key. It kind of also has that Disco Elysium or Kentucky Route Zero kind of thing of the sense of place is very important, and you're meeting a lot of characters, and their trials and their tribulations and their circumstances are all kind of defined by the setting and the location they live in, and how it's kind of had an impact on their lives or how they feel about living there and so on and so forth. And that acts to the set dressing, to the central mysteries. And it's intriguing enough. There's a bit of kind of True Detective season 1-y kind of vibes around that kind of that grimy southern setting, and everything is a little bit off kilter in just enough of a way that it's got a surprisingly unsettling feel for a point and click adventure, which traditionally can kind of have the edge taken off it as a result of its pacing. It's not flawless. I think sometimes the plot sort of hurtles along and is far too ready to throw terms and ideas and concepts at you, not game concepts, but fucking world concepts, human concepts at you at a rate that it's sometimes quite hard to pass and know to
I found that kind of frustrating in Disco Elysium when it was that whole sort of communist, political, what sort of personally, and I did find that kind of a little bit much. Yeah. So is it to that level, or is it not quite as bad?
It's that, but it's not quite as bad because rather than cultural issues or political issues, it's often sci-fi stuff. And so but it can be a lot of things in terms of names and companies and groups and
right.
One of the things that very early on is there's a term called head drive, which is basically a hard drive for your head, and it's a thing that can store your consciousness. But that term is introduced and used liberally 20 minutes before you meet a character who you can ask what it is. So you have to kind of have this thing where you're willing to not know what's going on or forego certain bits of information to stay with it, and I found that a bit tricky at times. There is
I find that with the crossover between like hard sci-fi and soft sci-fi is in that you're expected to sort of like be introduced and just take on a whole bunch of terms and a whole bunch of concepts, whereas I much prefer soft sci-fi, where it's like, don't worry about it. It's a lot more accessible. You don't got to worry about like getting too in the weeds with the terminology.
Yeah, exactly. This is like it's a weird one. It's not even that it's hard sci-fi. Like, I think a lot of the ideas probably do settle in the realm of soft sci-fi. It's just that it feels like it was written and presented from a perspective of someone who didn't want to waste any time offering you real world kind of like what he didn't want to explain anything. He didn't. The writer or writers of this game didn't want to waste any time or spend, because especially when everything's text based, they didn't want to like have you read explanations of where does this robot come from and how does it work and how did robots come to be integrate into society and like. So it just kind of asked you to go with it, but sometimes there were a few points where like the leaps it was asking me to go on left me a bit like there's nothing. I feel uncomfortable sometimes when I'm blind in a video game and I'm having, especially at a point and click adventure, I'm having a conversation, I'm choosing dialogue responses in the hope that I'm kind of going to piece this all together later. That can be a bit of a weird, like tricky spot to be in that Norco left me in a couple of times. But it is interesting, and it is on Game Pass, and it does have a very inconsistent, but at the same time, like weirdly good-looking pixel art style. I think there are some elements of it, particularly human faces, that are not handled particularly well, which is perhaps why, as a weird stylistic choice, the main character and her brother aren't presented with actual faces. They have like smiley faces that like it's very hard to explain.
I pulled up the webpage. I'm looking at a few of the images from the game now, which I must admit I do like that kind of like 90s, but it's futuristic aesthetic. Where it's almost like obviously 90s in the past, but it's like a alternate reality where we did have robots and more sci-fi stuff, but it's not super advanced. It's not like it's from the year 3000 or anything like that. Not that the year 3000 is going to be super advanced, as you know, Back to the Future has taught us 2015 was kind of a dud, so there you go.
Well, yeah, exactly. The future is never as exciting as it's made out to be.
Exactly.
Although, to be honest, when it comes to Norco's representation of the future, I think I'm happy with the one we're going to get. I don't want some of this stuff.
Oh, right, fair enough.
But yeah,
fair enough.
It's interesting.
Anything else this week, or is that just Norco?
That was it. I've played like a few hours here or there of random things. Like I played 2 or 3 hours of Disco Elysium. I played 3 hours of Grand Theft Auto San Andreas, the definitive edition. I played 3 hours of The Witcher 3. Like just random bits and pieces.
Wow, this has been a weird week for you.
I'm in one of those moods where I've got some things going on that I need to get back to and finish, but I'm also I'm darting around a little bit because I'm trying to be a little bit more relaxed about sort of indulging in those weird, like, one-off urges you get to just play something. And so when I had a thing the other day that was like, I really want to play Disco Elysium again, I downloaded it, I played it for 3 hours, and I haven't touched it since, and that's fine. That's cool. Yeah. Like, that... Yeah.
It must be nice when you do that with a game you've finished, because it's not like you think like, oh, if I don't finish it this time, maybe I'll never finish it.
Yeah, especially in the case of Disco Elysium, where you can specifically try and do things to, upset the way the game wants to go, or do things differently to how you did it the first time, which I did manage to do inside the first 2 or 3 hours. Anything else would be a spoiler, but that was my week. How about yours?
So, do you know what? I'm not really going to touch on mine too much because I know I'm boring people because I've been playing more Lego Star Wars Skywalker Saga. Not much else to tell. Been playing a bit more of that. But I tell you what, I've kind of done what you said, which is I've delved back into a game I haven't played for a while, which is Jedi Fallen Order. I downloaded the PS5 free update for that, and I've just sort of like got back into playing it because I'd never finished it. And because I've been on this Star Wars kick, I was like, do you know what? That is a Star Wars game with some good feeling, like combat and some lightsaber spinning. So I thought, hop back in.
And we're going to see the new one in like less than 2 weeks' time, I think.
I don't want to get like I don't want to bore people again with Star Wars. I keep mentioning it last few weeks, but it's weird going back into Fallen Order. I was kind of like, oh yeah, this game is really cool, but at the same time, I was like, I really hope the sequel was different.
Different how?
I don't really like the setup of Fallen Order. I sort of remembered that one of the things I didn't like was the basically like the level design, the way that they had, the meditation points where your enemies all respawned and stuff like that. Like I'm not a fan of that. I don't like that anyway as a game mechanic. I don't think it adds anything. I can see why developers do it. I can see why people make games
because
like that.
People like Dark Souls. That's why they do it.
No, but it's a weird one because people like Dark Souls, but do they like that element in Dark Souls, or is it just in Dark Souls and people like Dark Souls, so people assume they like it? Like,
I think it's one and the same. They like Dark Souls in it, and it's in it, and as a result, they like it and it's in Dark Souls. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I don't like Dark Souls, so that's probably the problem. But I much prefer more traditional kind of like, more linear adventures where you go from point A to point B and you fight all the people on the way and it's like a story. The idea of like you meditate and everyone comes back is just like a stupid game mechanic that I'm like, I'd rather it was not stupid. I don't mean, but if you like it, you like it. But I like the illusion that I'm like on a journey and on a story doing things. I don't really need 3 stormtroopers that I've already fought 30 times to come back again because I just meditated.
I didn't think their adherence to some of those Soulsborne ideas, caused them to lose any momentum when it came to the story they were telling or any sense of urgency that was attributed to that story. Like, it still felt like an adventure to me, an action adventure game, just one that was very heavily Soulsborne inspired. Maybe.
I mean, there was I'm trying to think, like, I get what you mean, but in the sense of, like, it's more of, like, the small mob creatures as well, or combatants as well. It's like, I don't need the same little arachnid, like, venom-spitting thing to appear every time I want to go and, like, assign some skill points or heal up. Like, it just feels like a needless addition to the game. But maybe if it wasn't there, then I'd be like, this game is dead. There's no one here.
Well, it would have to be a completely different game, right? Like, if it wasn't there, they wouldn't be able to embrace any of those kind of Metroidvania elements. They wouldn't have the kind of, like, again, if you're going to create a game where you're giving players items or equipment or abilities that allow them to access new areas and previously, explored regions, or, find new paths and so on and so forth, then you need to give them new things to fight every time they go back there. And if all those worlds were sparse every time you killed those enemies once, then you're just running through empty Star Warsy terrain, and it's tricky. Because the alternative is you have to make something that's, black and white linear, like The Force Unleashed was.
And I liked The Force Unleashed. I thought it was really good. But I wouldn't mind it if it was like when you revisited a place, the enemies were back. It's more like I don't like the mechanic of, do you want to rest and get your health back? You're going to have to fight the same enemies. It's almost like an annoying like NPC from a FromSoft game going, are you sure you want to do that, adventurer? It's going to be annoying when you get back out there and then you've got to fight the same people. I'm like, especially when there's like certain enemies that you've already fought and you're like, you go from A to B and you've had to fight a number of people and then you get killed by like a boss and then you have to run through that same section again and you're like, oh, really? And because it's too, I don't know, like it's fine. It's a cool game and I do like it, but just some of those elements I'm like.
You pumped the brakes quite hard there.
Yeah. I was like, how much are they going to adhere to it? But I'm interested to see. Yeah, I just wanted to do some cool lightsaber swinging, really. That's why I was playing it. So.
I mean, there is that. And you end up choosing the colour of your lightsaber, so.
Yeah, you get a lot of choice and stuff to sort of with your lightsabers. I think I've got. I think you'd have dual as well. I've got like a double-ended one and a single one or whatever. Yeah, but I'm pretty sure you can dual wield as well, can't you?
I mean, yeah, I don't know if people consider that a spoiler anymore. I guess it's been out long enough, but yes, you can.
I have no idea how far I'm into the game either. I need to. I don't.
I mean,
know
if you've got the dual wielding, then I think you're not. Did you ever finish it?
No, I didn't. This is why I need to go back. Okay. I got to a point where I was like, I was fighting the Brotherhood or whatever they're called, and they were just annoying me, and it was like an annoying level and planet, and I was like, I don't really want to do this anymore, so I just stopped playing it. And then I went back in, and the problem is going back into this thing you stopped before because you weren't really enjoying it is rough to try and get through, because then you've forgotten how to play it, and you've forgotten the mechanics, and you've got to pick it up again. So yeah,
weird.
But I don't want to drag on about Star Wars anyway, so I think we should talk about Blue Box Games and Abandoned, because we were teasing it earlier on. And we haven't spoken about it for a little while, and we covered it a few times back in the It's Kojima, It's Not Kojima days, but there's been some interesting developments. And it's kind of an ongoing thing as well, so we thought we'd talk about it. Okay, let me start by saying, when we were talking about Silent Hill, and we were talking about corroboration, and a lot of people have said this is definitely happening, there are multiple sources for this. This is not that. This is some random Twitter people who've now deleted comments, deleted their accounts, with a little bit of backup from some more established tweeters. But let me start with saying allegedly, and some people have said, so you can just slide that in, so I'm not going to have to say it the whole way through the story, and then we won't get sued, if anything's completely made up. But the reason we wanted to talk about this is because it came out this week that there have been some leaks around Blue Box and Abandoned, and that it may well not even be a game and was never intended to be a game, Jamie, because it was in fact a scam from the get-go. And that Hassan Karaman is not Kojima. It is not going to be this new Silent Hills game that everyone was hoping. It was always, Jamie, a cheeky little scam to get investors to pump money into their company, and then they could basically cancel the game and move on. Are you surprised to hear this latest development?
Surprised, no. Surprised would be, I think, a bridge too far. Like, there's always been an air around everything Blue Box, everything Hassan, everything Abandoned, that it's not what it's not what it's looks like. It's not what it's presenting to be. It's not what Hassan describes it as. And like, if you had asked me this time last week, before we got the latest revelations and the latest leaks, and the various sort of comments and conjecture that we're going to get into in a moment, what I thought once and for all, what I thought Abandoned was, I would have said it was an independent first-person horror game or survival horror game, or not even first-person, an independent survival horror game that was planned out by an overly ambitious but slightly naive independent game studio based in Holland. They made a trailer, almost like a mood piece for the game, that got them way more attention than they ever thought they would get. Meanwhile, there was actually no evidence of a game, and so, but in order to try and maintain the hype and excitement and anticipation for the title, they either at times manufactured, but more often than not lent into the links that people were creating between them and Silent Hill and Hideo Kojima and Konami, and also strung people along as much as they could with things like that whole thing last year of the thing you could download that ended up having a 5-second video on it, all that bullshit. Anything that they could do to try and basically extend the runway, with that not Looney Tunes, it's like the thing where the train's are about to go off the tracks. He's laying down the tracks in front of the train as fast as he can. Right. The cartoon, it was like that, and the pieces that track was assembled with involved, leaning into, like I said, those links and any attention they could get, because it was all positive, right? And I'm sure there was a part of them that knew they never needed to make a game. They never needed to actually release anything. Hassan Karaman is a name now. I know that name. I don't need to look at a script. Blue Box Games is a name. They don't need to do anything. They've already won in some respects. But I'd be lying if I said I expected the scam element to kind of come into it. I knew it was vaporware, that it might not exist, but scam I wouldn't have said I knew.
It's a slightly strange one, because I think I would agree with exactly what you've said. It seems like they had something in development. It kind of became bigger than they thought, and then they ran with it. I think to me, that seemed absolutely right. What you've just said seems bang on. This kind of pushes it a little bit further and says that it's not only is it that, but it goes further, and it was an outright scam in the sense of there was no intention ever to make a full game, and the intention was always to make a demo, was to get people to install it. And was then to use that sort of to leverage or to leverage that to then say to investors, hey, look, we've got this access, we're on PlayStation, probably to use some of the Sony stuff, like, oh, you know, we're working with these people from Sony, so look how good we're doing, you should put money into us. It does get a little bit sort of like confused as to how much of it is true, the scam story, because one of the people that actually originally did the leak has now like deleted everything. It was picked up by Lance McDonald on Twitter, who we've sort of referenced before on this show and talked about, you know, leaks and things in the past. And he sort of has retweeted a number of the tweets from the initial leaker, who's basically said that not only were they leaning into it, like you said, Jamie, they actually had meetings at Blue Box Games where they were effectively saying, we're going to create fake images to put out to kind of push the Silent Hills narrative, that we've got that we're going to do a number of things in order to foster that, in order to push that idea, to create, I suppose, the bubble around the game, to keep the excitement there. There's no way that they'd started out with this intention, I don't think. I think, sure, they lent into it. I don't think they started out with the intention of being like, we're going to scam people to make them think this is Silent Hills. I don't believe they would have been. If they did, they should get hired by like the next whatever developer who's looking to like push a game, do an ARG or whatever, because that means that they are so good at marketing. They should get. I mean, Hassan Karaman should get his hand bit off by a number of companies.
The thing is, they're not though, because the best marketing that ever happened for them or their product was done by people on the internet who got the wrong end of the stick, or were so desperate for something that didn't exist that they made this real. They did the marketing.
But if you believe some of this scam, you have to believe that was the intention almost from the get-go.
I don't believe so. No, because you go back to the original like Reddit posts, there were people who were breaking down the fact that if you translate Hassan Karaman's name back into Japanese or something, that it's Hideo Kojima. We now know that there were so many bits of information like that were incidental. Like, Hassan Karaman is a real dude, and that's just his name, and he's nothing to do with Hideo Kojima. I don't believe that. I think, of course, they lent started.
It's not. His name's Brian.
Oh, of course, yeah, big Brian, Brian Conrad. I think they ran with it at some point and lent into it at others. But again, I don't think this was a marketing masterclass. I think this was a happy coincidence that then became a question of how do we monetize this.
But so this is what I'm saying. There's a point at which, like, if you believe it's an outright scam and you believe that from the get-go they had no intention of making a game and it was all the push the Silent Hill narrative, then you would have to say that they are marketing geniuses. However, I don't. No, but if that was the intent, let's say 3-4 years ago,
I think it became the 3 or 4 years, yeah, sure.
And they said, we're gonna make people think that we're making a Silent Hill game. We're only gonna release a demo. We're gonna get it really popular online, and then we're gonna get invested. Like, you would have to agree that would make them marketing geniuses if they did that.
Yes, but they didn't. They fell into it.
I agree with you. I don't think that is that far back. I think they fell into it after, like, the internet took it and ran with it and made it something, which it really was.
Although I do believe that that once this whole thing started to spiral out of control, that they never had any intention of making a game.
Oh no, yeah, I completely agree. Yeah,
a weird analogy, but you of all people.
Well, I mean, when Hassan was like 8K textures, you're like, this man doesn't know how to make games.
No, but also like you of all people know exactly what I mean when I say that Blue Box Games finally releasing a full price product or any kind of retail product called Abandoned is like the OnlyFans or Patreon equivalent of finally showing your you know what.
Right.
Like,
yes.
Like, it's the thing that people think they want. It's the thing that you're holding back from people, but it's also the thing that once they've seen it for what it is, they go, okay, cool. Nice. I'm moving on.
I love that you started that way, saying I would totally get this.
Because you're a dirty dog, mate. Everyone knows it.
I do totally get that. What you're saying. Yeah. Like, this is the thing. If they show the goods, then you know it's not what you thought it was, and you know that it's a low rent. It's a small studio making a low rent game. They don't really know what they're doing. It's a bit crap. You're right. They've got to keep that illusion going.
Yeah.
I could get filth with it, but I'm not going to. Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. No, you are right. You are 100%.
The second that this took a life of its own, they knew that like they could never release a product called Abandoned. I think that you don't have to be like even halfway to being a smart individual to know that that was the case, like for them to be aware that was the situation they were in. They could never release anything. It was all about getting as much as they could out of what little they had, and given how strenuous it was. The part that I guess I didn't put two and two together on was the potential for this to turn into some kind of scam, or for them to fleece, whether it's consumers or whether it's investors, whatever the case may be, for financial gain. I guess I hoped that this would end up being a more innocent story than that.
I'm going to leave purposefully a few seconds right now because I don't want people to get really mad at me, because I'm one of the people on the train, so I don't want people to get angry and start to spit their cherry coke out when I say this. But there is a continuation from, I think, what Blue Box are doing with Abandoned and something like Star Citizen from Cloud Imperium Games, because there is a continuum whereby one is a scam where they're trying to get money and there's no intention of ever having a product, whereas you look at something like Cloud Imperium Games where I fully believe they intend to release a Star Citizen game and they want to make it the thing that they've always said it's going to be, and it's going to be incredible. But there's kind of a similarity there in that they both, as soon as they both come out and you act, like you said, as soon as you both release that game, the story's over. The idea of the production being the most exciting point, and you know, always wondering what the potential could be. It's like a present at Christmas. When you're holding the present and it's all wrapped up and you don't know what it is pure potential. It's Schrodinger's cat. Until you open the box, you don't actually see it. And I think that's one of the things. It's one of the problems with making games that promise the world, like Star Citizen. As soon as you open that box and you see what it really is, and you go, "Oh, it's not what I thought it was going to be." Abandoned. As soon as you open the box and look, it's just another indie studio that have tried to make a really good horror game and failed.
Yeah,
it's one of those things.
I can't remember if we talked about it in the podcast or not, because it has over the recent years been the subject of a pretty good documentary, a feature-length documentary, and most recently a dramatized series. But Theranos, Elizabeth Holmes's company that claimed to be able to produce, blood test results from a tiny, like one drop
of blood or something.
Yeah, one drop size that comes.
Elizabeth Holmes.
Exactly, Elizabeth Holmes, the widest eyes and the deepest voice on a woman ever.
Hello there, I'm Elizabeth Holmes.
That was my Elizabeth Holmes laugh for anyone listening. But it was exactly that. It was to fake it till you make it taken to the nth degree, and it was like, you can't show people the thing that they think you're making, because one, you're not making it, and two, in that case, you can't make it, which is also probably the situation with Abandoned. But what was happening in the meantime? People were getting interested, people were getting enthusiastic, people were excited about the prospect, because if you talk about something with enough confidence and you let people's imaginations run wild as to what the possibilities are with the thing you're claiming you're making, then, I mean, in Hassan's case, we're talking about, Twitter followers and Reddit posts, but Theranos' case, you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars of investment and thousands of jobs in the end. And then you get into the weird kind of like mentality of a Hassan Karaman or an Elizabeth Holmes, which is, to what extent was it malicious? And you talk about scamming. Like, one of my favorite kind of things that they go into in the documentary about Theranos, and there's a guy that they keep talking to, and I think he's a psychologist of some kind, or he's a behavioral therapist, or he studies human behavior, something in that realm. And he gives an interesting case study, and I'll have to cut it down because I don't want to talk for too long. But essentially, it was a simple test involving the roll of a die and the potential financial reward for individuals based on what they guessed. But they were trusted to reveal whether or not they'd guessed things right in this study, and they did multiple iterations of it. And what they found was that on a base level, people are willing to lie for financial gain. If you attach them to a lie detector, most of those people are no longer willing to lie for a financial gain. And if you tie them to up to a lie detector and tell them that financial gain will be passed on to a charity, as many people will lie as they did before, but the lie detector won't detect any more people. So it's like, that is that kind of interesting human psychology thing is if you get deep enough to believe your own bullshit, then you no longer see it as doing a bad thing. And then I wonder if we loop back around to Hassan and like how he was, the last time we talked about him, he was out on Twitter adamantly defending himself. If he genuinely believes in Abandon and what they're doing or what they're making, and thinks it's just a question of time and faith and money, then maybe the word scam becomes a tricky one to use.
I think it does, because you've got to imagine that someone like him, maybe what he's thinking is, if we get the money for Abandoned, we can then make another game, which is the game we really want to make, which is the really cool game that everyone would like, but we couldn't afford to make it, so we had to make Abandoned. It's funny because like I sort of drew a line between Abandoned and Star Citizen. I think you could draw a line between like Theranos and or Elizabeth Holmes and Elon Musk. Like, both of them have spouted bullshit at times. One, like, but they're, like Hyperloop and flying around the world in rockets, like, is bullshit. Like, it would never work. But he got away with that because he was at PayPal, made a load of money. Tesla's done well, made a load of money. The difference is that he's not messed around with people's health like Elizabeth Holmes did. So people are more prepared to sort of accept when he messes up and says something stupid. People go, oh, he said something stupid. Whereas Elizabeth Holmes is the sort of person who was like, she messed with people's well-being. And she may well have intended that if we get enough money, we can actually make this one blood drop thing work. The fact that it was never going to work because the technology didn't exist was here nor there. So it's like you said, it's that justification about scam, not scam. Like, it's interesting, man. It's very interesting. But that is not the end of the story, Jamie, because about sort of less than a day ago, 20 hours ago, Lance McDonald, who has now deleted a whole load of his tweets. So we had to go to some like next dodgy site in order to just get the story, because it seemed like it was sort of scrubbed from the internet. Actually had a statement originally on his Twitter that he's now deleted. And he said, "You are going to find out why I deleted that statement from Hassan about the Abandoned leaks really soon. And you'll understand why I don't want my name around his when that shitstorm goes down." So you've got to assume that something is maybe coming. I think, if I had to guess, it would be that Sony have caught wind of this and have maybe looked into it and have realised that it's all a load of bollocks and it was never going to be a game. It was vaporware, and effectively are going to, release a statement or something saying, these people are bullshit. We're not working with them. We have nothing to do with them. Blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
Snip them off.
And finally kill this story once and for all.
Yeah, and then there'll be that'll be the end. That'll be the end. And then Hassan will pull off the mask and Kojima will be underneath. And we'll all start again.
It's got to the point where it wouldn't even be worth it. Like, if the mask comes off and it's Hideo Kojima, I'd turn around and say, Kojima-san, this is the dumbest thing you've ever done.
This was too much.
Yeah. You're like 18 months late on the reveal.
Yes. Yeah. You should have come out a while ago. Because this has been...
As soon as it got its own subreddit, you should have pulled the mask off.
Yeah, it's far too late. But Jamie, that is the end of the story when it comes to that. But I know that you had a couple of some quick takes that you wanted to chat about. Yeah,
for sure. I mean, do you want me to throw them out there, or should we?
Yeah. No, I think you should, and then we'll have a little chat about them.
Absolutely. Well, I thought one thing we could talk about is more of an update on a story from, I guess, that's been unraveling over the last couple of weeks and or months if you go back into the rumory leaky stage. But we have finally got a far clearer look and a far better idea of what PlayStation's lineup for its updated PlayStation Plus offerings are going to look like. We've already talked in the past about how they are rolling up PlayStation Plus and services like PlayStation Now into one package and adding levels to that. So there's like an essential tier, and there's like a slightly more upgraded premium tier, and then there's the dog's bollocks tier. And we knew that there were going to be things like libraries of games, there were going to be game trials, there were going to be classic games. We have basically now got a solid look at the list of games that are going to be coming out when this service launches. And I don't know, I thought it was pretty positive, but there's been mixed opinions. Do you remember what your take was based on that, your first look at that list?
I kind of, I don't know. I was kind of like, okay. Like, I didn't really have any feelings one way or the other. Like, I think a lot of people were getting maybe a little bit annoyed because although it was never going to be a Game Pass for PlayStation, I think some people maybe still thought it was going to kind of be a Game Pass for PlayStation.
Yes.
But it wasn't. It wasn't. It was just an updated version of PlayStation Plus. And it was like, but I don't really know. It didn't really change my opinion on the whole thing either way. I thought they've kind of rebranding and just changing it up a little bit. It was never going to be anything that amazing based on the library of games you got when you got a PlayStation 5 and stuff like that. It was always going to be a little bit of a damp squib.
Yes. I kind of completely agree with you in so much as that people's reactions to this, in my opinion, like just based on what I've observed, tends to track along the lines of the more you anticipated it to be this big, new, exciting thing, the more disappointed you're inevitably going to be. Because, like you said, this is really just a consolidation of their current services and all the things they already offered. They're just making it more streamlined and maybe juicing it up a little bit. As if to emphasize that, the price difference between the PlayStation Plus Essential tier and the PlayStation Plus Extra tier, Essential being basically what PlayStation Plus is now, and Extra being the thing that gets a big catalogue of PS4 and PS5 games that you can download and play, is like £3-4 a month here in the UK.
Right.
Like, you're not going to pay that much more and get, you know, and find that Horizon Forbidden West is on there, and all of a sudden that's £70 you don't need to pay. So it was always going to have that asterisk next to it of like, hey, this is them consolidating PlayStation Now and making it more accessible. There are some cool things on there, though.
Returnal was going to be on there, right?
So Returnal is, in terms of PS5 games, like which, you know, so Returnal's on there. Marvel Spider-Man Miles Morales is on there. So again, these are games that if you bought a PS5 now, you would just be able to sign up for the PlayStation Now Extra tier, PlayStation Plus Extra tier, excuse me, and have these games ready available to you. Demon Souls, which, you know, I think is again a solid kind of offering that fits in with that, you know, came out in that launch window. And then the director's cut versions of Death Stranding and Ghost of Tsushima, and then they also threw Destruction All Stars in there, although again most people already got that for free as a PlayStation Plus title. And again, there are a few other PS5 games in there that come from their partners. One thing to note is that Ubisoft are getting really behind this, and Ubisoft have actually created a new service called Ubisoft Plus Classics, which basically is them taking basically the games in their back catalogue that they deem as old enough, putting them up into one package and adding it to what PlayStation offering at no extra cost. Result of that means, for example, that the PS5 version of Assassin's Creed Valhalla is a part of this. The PS5 version of Control Ultimate Edition is there. One that is interesting, considering there were rumours Xbox paid a lot of money for it, is that the PS5 version of Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy is a part of this service. The PS5 versions of Mortal Kombat 11, NBA 2K22, and The Artful Escape. They are all there. And then there's, you know, tens of other PS4 games from things that, again, were part of that kind of PS Plus collection, like Days Gone or God of War and so on and so forth, to, you know, things that are just, I don't even know, like Dead Cells and Batman Arkham Knight or...
I think my take from it hasn't really changed in the sense of the PlayStation 5 is got a bit of a problem, which is that A, it's hard to get hold of, although it is becoming easier and, you know, should become easier this year. I get later on this year. But if you can get hold of one, games are very expensive. If you want to get a PlayStation 5 game, you're gonna be spending like, you know, over 300 quid to get the PlayStation 5, and then every time you want to get a new game, it's going to cost you a decent chunk of change. So for me, the thing with this always was, this is a great thing to get when you first get a PlayStation 5 or have had one for a little while, and you want to play a bunch of PlayStation 5 games, you know, very affordably. I think that's what it is. It's a great idea. And then there's a whole bunch of other stuff on there that, hey, you might say, oh, I never played that. I don't really want to spend a bunch of money. So this is quite a good product, you know, to dip in some older PlayStation 4 titles, etc. I think the thing it falls down on, I think that that people kind of got a bit not confused about, but maybe they were hoping for something a bit different, was that whereby Game Pass is like, oh, every Xbox game launches on Game Pass, you can play it. This was never going to be that. PlayStation Studios games were never going to drop day one onto these services.
Yeah, never.
And I think once you've got once you're paying for your whatever tier you're going to pay for, that you're still going to get new games every month that you can play, but you're not going to be getting, you know, brand new games, really exciting games dropping in for free. Like, you might occasionally like get stuff, but I kind of feel like it's going to be after, say, 6 months, you're going to go, I've exhausted everything I kind of wanted to exhaust on that list, and I'm going to have to wait a long time for something else to drop on there that I want to play. But it's a good list of games. Like especially if you haven't played a lot of them, it's not bad by any stretch. But it's not. No. Yeah, it's
like Chris. What it is. We were talking to Chris because he's obviously a Soulsborne guy playing like Elden Ring at the moment, but he doesn't. He has a PS5 but doesn't have Demon's Souls, and so like this is a way for him where even if he just signs up for 1 month and just like he plays Demon's Souls, like maybe he plays a couple of hours of Returnal because he never played it, or he wants to see what I don't know. He wants to go back to Red Dead Redemption 2 because he didn't feel he gave it a fair shake. Or Marvel's Guardians of the Galaxy. That's something he heard us two talk about, never played it himself. Like, you can dip in and out of a service like this and play a couple of pretty big heavy hitters. Like you said, save yourself a few £100 on titles and you kind of got your money's worth. Where it becomes a slightly trickier long-term prospect is if you wanted to pay the big boy service, which is PlayStation Plus Premium, where you start to get game trials and classic games. For me, the options start to get a bit shakier. To give you an example, the original PlayStation and PSP titles that have been included again, I'm not suggesting that it's super easy to go out and license PS1 games or emulate PS1 games, but like this felt like a library that it would be pretty easy to kind of like stack full of classics. Even that, remember that dinky plastic PlayStation, what do they call those things when they released the mini versions of the consoles? Nintendo did it for a couple.
It was just mini, wasn't it?
Was it mini?
I think it was just like PlayStation Mini or something.
Maybe,
like that, yeah.
But even that, like they went
insanely
out and got like
expensive. They were so expensive to try and get hold of now.
Yeah, expensive. I've never taken mine out of the box. But even when you look at that list of games, like they went out and they got like Metal Gear, and I think they got one of the Tony Hawk. I don't remember, but like you look at this, I'll read out every single OG PS1 game: Ape Escape, Hot Shots Golf, IQ Intelligent Cube, Jumping Flash, Siphon Filter, Mr. Driller, Tekken 2, Worms World Party, and Worms Armageddon. For anyone
Worms
counting,
Armageddon was good.
Yeah, but Jonesy, that was 10. I said, I said 9 games there, and two of them were Worms games. And I'm sure there are people out there that really want to play Jumping Flash or IQ Intelligent Cube, but when you're launching a service, a PlayStation service, with 9 PS1 games, like it's Ape Escape, Hot Shots, Siphon Filter, and Tekken 2. Because shoot me, I don't need to play more Worms right now in my life.
No, I agree. The only thing about this, I'm a bit like, it'd be interesting to see is because they've said, haven't they, that the higher tiers, at the moment you get like the PlayStation Plus monthly games. They have said that you will get like PlayStation 5 monthly games like you do now with the PlayStation Plus. And I'm like, okay, that's cool. But I would love to, I would like to know going forward, like a year down the line, what those titles are.
What titles are you referring to?
Oh, because they've said, haven't they, that with the PlayStation, as you get now PlayStation Plus games, haven't they said that if you get the highest tier, they will be putting like PlayStation 5 titles on that monthly, like games for May or whatever, you'll get like a PlayStation 5 game.
I don't think the PlayStation Plus games are any different, depending on like the quote unquote PlayStation Plus games are any different.
Or the top tier. I don't know what they're calling their top tier.
The top tier is called Premium. Yeah. The only thing. Sorry, go for it.
When I was going to say, I thought they said that they would have a different games released across each tier. So instead of PlayStation, it's not. It's the same. Is it the same?
My understanding is that the quote unquote PlayStation Plus games, like the 2 or 3 free titles every month, will be the same across. I might be wrong there.
I thought that they were going to do like a different thing for each tier, and because then I was thinking that you would get at least an update. There's a PlayStation 5 game on there, which you kind of get at the moment, but you don't often. No. But I was going to say, it'd be good to know what those
Premium gets the classic titles and it gets the game trials.
Right. Okay. So, and the game trial thing was a weird one as well, because like we were saying, to be made to do that, and then who the hell's going to do it and who's going to agree to it.
So the game trial thing, it is a 2-hour trial of the full game. The playtime counter only counts when you're in the game, and it's a great way to try games before you decide to buy. At launch, they're going to have, for PlayStation side of things, Uncharted Legacy of Thieves Collection, which feels like a very strange game to trial unless you really just want to see get 2 hours worth of looking at how much better those games look, and Horizon Forbidden West. And on the third-party side, interestingly enough, it's Cyberpunk, Farming Simulator 22, Tiny Tina's Wonderlands, and WWE 2K22. So, 2 hour trials of each of those available for people on the highest of tiers.
And we don't even have long, do we, to see for this to actually take effect, for the PlayStation to make the change, because it's going to be happening. When is it? We'll find the date here. About a month or so for Europe, June 23rd. So not long at all. Yeah,
this kind of touched on what you were saying, Jonesy. So PlayStation Plus Essential, which is the baseline and is what we're all technically on now, a monthly refresh will occur on the first Tuesday of the month for the PlayStation Plus Essential plan and both higher tiers, with new PS4 and PS5 games added to the service, same as what PlayStation Plus members get today.
Yeah, which is what we get, yeah.
And then extra and premium, it says, an additional monthly refresh will occur in the middle of each month with new games across the PlayStation Plus Extra and Premium plans. The number of games refreshed will vary per month, which I presume is referring to like that big catalogue of games.
So for those higher tiers, there'll be an extra refresh.
It sounds,
every month.
But I don't.
Then that's the thing of like what are they going to do? Like, they're not going to give you a new game, like a new. Oh, this game just came out. It's going to be like a.
Well, I think they're talking about adding to that the catalogue of titles that you can just download and play. Which the weird thing is, like, it functions identically, because even PlayStation Plus games, you need to have an active account to play them. So this will still function. It's just another tier, and it's like instead of having 3 games a month, you have like 100 games indefinitely. It's just,
and then they add some.
Yeah, I could see a thing where it's the start of the month. It's like, here's the 3 games for this month. Like this month, it's FIFA, Tribes of Midgard, and Curse of the Dead Gods, or whatever it's called. And in the middle of the month, it's like, oh, today we're adding fucking Wreckfest to the PlayStation game, the PS5 game catalog for PS Plus Extra and Premium plans. Yeah, I don't know. It's gonna be weird.
It'll be weird for about a week, and then everyone will be like, "Oh, it's no different." It's just a different menu like system. Instead of having to go to 3 different things now, it's just all under one heading or something. Yeah,
that is true.
True. But keeping the conversation about games going, Ubisoft's elusive Roller Champions, Jamie, is finally going to be coming out, and it's going to be released next week.
Yeah,
for free.
This is just a funny one to me, because it feels like we've had so many conversations over the last couple of months about how we've got no idea what the fuck Ubisoft are doing and where certain games are. So for this to just reappear and be like, yeah, it's out next week and it's free, is kind of like, it's almost the cherry on top.
It's Ubisoft's marketing has been awful, I think, as well recently. So they've just seemed to randomly they talk about a game, they push it, they do quite well, and then the actual release is just like, what? It was the same as with what is it called? I can't remember. I've got the damn game and I can't remember what it's called. The Riders Republic. Riders Republic. They did a whole beta thing. They had a big like, oh, are you excited about a Riders Republic? And then when it actually came out, it was almost like a just forgettable experience. No one even mentioned it. It was the same with Watch Dogs Legion. They just they were talking about it for years, and they were talking about all this. Oh, it's going to be so exciting. You can change all different people. And then when they released it, it was almost like they didn't want to release it, and they just sort of went, oh yeah, by the way, that game came out. And this is a game that we talked about a few times, like over the years, and then they have not mentioned it for ages, and suddenly it's just slipping out for free.
Yeah, it was announced 3 years ago.
Which is bizarre. Like, is it that bad that they're just sort of going, we don't want to announce it, we don't really want to talk about it, we just want to slip it out because we've made it, so...
I think it got caught up in the cycle where they just, they didn't know what to do with it. And as if to illustrate that point, another interesting footnote about Roller Champions: no PS5 or Xbox Series X versions. This is a previous gen game that you have to play in backwards compatibility mode.
Do you know what I hope happens with this? I hope it absolutely smashes it. People love it, and Ubisoft go back and like, oh my goodness, we're going to make an updated version because people love it so much. I can't believe it. So
the trailers don't.
It's going to become the next big streaming game, the next big esports game.
Well, it worked for Hyperscape, right? People loved that. It does look fun. Like, it has that thing that, you know how, like, every year since Rocket League, like 8 times a year we'll go, oh, this looks like it could be the new Rocket League. because it looks like it's free and it's fun and it's accessible. This is just one of those where it's like, oh, it's people roller skating around in circles and like kind of playing dodgeball and / handball at the same time.
Right.
If it's fun, it'll be fun. Like, we downloaded, what was the game we just talked about?
Destruction.
Yeah, Destruction All Stars. And we played that together, and like it's like, okay, this is free and dumb and not that good, but okay. And then we forgot about it.
But it was supposed to be a full price game.
True, actually. That is
no one played for free. So imagine if you paid for it.
That's an important caveat, you're right.
Which is because there's a weird space now in that I think, and I've said this before. I feel like there are games that come out that are supposed to be one thing, but then the players make them something else, and they become like an entity unto themselves that the developer maybe never really had. They didn't have in mind it was going to be that successful based on like whatever. Like Rocket League's a good example because it came out. The way people play that game and the insane stunts and things people like managed to do, and they kind of made it this insane thing on their own. And then every time it seems like they try and introduce new game types and things, they don't work because everyone's like, "What are you doing? What have you given me basketball for? Why have you given me like some weird like American football style? I just want to play Rocket League." It's like the developers don't even know what makes the game good. And so I think that must come off when you're making a game as well, like Roller Derby, All Stars Champions, what this is called, in that they surely are trying to make a good esports game, but they don't know how to do it. They know how to make a game, but they don't know what's going to make it popular. And so you've probably got no idea until you actually release it.
I mean, yeah, I think there is a certain nowadays more so than ever when you're releasing a game that is got a relatively simple premise, and you know it's going to live and thrive off the support it receives in a competitive multiplayer environment. Yeah, you are just kind of putting it out there and hoping for the best. Absolutely.
I think you can tell if a game is not going to be good, and that's by putting on a funny voice and then describing it as like an overly excitable 23-year-old who's in a meeting. Like Destruction All Stars, you can imagine them going, "Yeah, it's gonna be a really good game where you drive around in an arena in a car, and then you can get out the car, and then you can jump and run, and you've got all these game modes." And I'm like, no.
I liked Destruction All Stars in theory, and I'm going to go ahead and say that if driving and crashing into people, i.e. the fundamentals of a Destruction Derby game, felt better, then I would have played a lot more of that game. And
maybe I don't think you would. Do you know what you would have played more of? Just Destruction Derby. Don't overthink it. Just make a Destruction Derby game. I think if they'd have just made a really like a modern, very good looking, great crash physics game with like particle effects and stuff, and said, "There you go, it's a Destruction Derby game." I
mean, that's Wreckfest, right? Which is
right.
Again, I played more Wreckfest than I played Destruction All Stars. So yeah, that kind of proves your point.
Don't overthink it, guys. Just chill.
Yeah. One thing that I'm not sure if it's been overthought or underthought, or even thought of at all, is like there were some kind of PlayStation stories that have been swirling around this past week because pinch of salt, asterisk, blah 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 blah. Some people think there might be some kind of PlayStation event or showcase next month in June, which in theory would time up with everyone else's, and. You know, well, there have been a few hints here or there as to why that might be happening. For example, Tetsuya Nomura, who directed the Final Fantasy VII Remake and is involved in Final Fantasy 16, said we will hear more about Final Fantasy VII Remake's future next month. And people have reminded us all that PlayStation, of course, have a marketing deal with Square Enix for both Final Fantasy games in development, Final Fantasy 16 being the other. So there's that weird feeling of like, if they appear anywhere, they should, in theory, be appearing at a PlayStation event, unless Square do their own Final Fantasy thing, which is possible. But the other weird Sony rumour...
Do you know what I have to say about that? Just quickly. 2 years too late.
Oh, for Final Fantasy VII Remake?
Final Fantasy VII Remake Episode 2 should have come out 2 years ago. What the hell have they been doing? Like, why? It doesn't make any sense. They made, like, part 1 and then just went quiet.
Yeah. I remember saying to Chris at the time, after I finished the Final Fantasy VII Remake... and I said to him, even if you told me the second part was coming out in 6 months, I'm still not sure I'm committed to playing it. You add like fucking 2-3 years to that time, and I'm like, I don't even fucking remember what happened in the first part. And I don't even know how many parts there are going to be.
It should have been, do you know what? 6 months, if it had been released I don't remember like when in 2020 it came out, but if they'd have, let's say it was like middle of the year, if they'd have said it's coming, the second part's coming out at Christmas, that would have been fine. If they'd have announced it like a month after part 1 had come out, but just to be silent for 2 years makes no sense.
Yes, it is a weird marketing strategy.
It's because it's not even a second game. It's a game that already has been out for donkey's years.
Yeah,
that they were going to do episodically. Like, what are you doing?
Especially because, like, I wouldn't be surprised if Final Fantasy 16 came out first, which is also just like equally beguiling in its own right. Because like I'd almost be more inclined to play that because that's a new entry in the series, and I can like feel like I'm going in fresh without having to remember my, all the memories I'd repressed from Final Fantasy VII Remake because I didn't love that game as much as some other people did. Weird.
I would agree with you, except I played Final Fantasy VII Remake demo and I kind of got what was going on. I played Final Fantasy 15. I had no idea what was going on after like 3 hours of that game. There was some pretty people in a car and I was driving, but it was open world, but it wasn't. And then I got out and I could fight people, but it was like turn-based, but it wasn't. And it was bloody weird.
That sounds like a bit of a you problem. I can't lie.
That is sure, it was weird. And I was like, I just turned it off. I just silently turned it off and then never went back to it.
I feel like that's how a lot of your journey with a lot of games ends.
No, because usually
that's what you said about Jedi Fallen Order earlier. You were like, I'm going to silently turn this off.
But that was like I was into it, and it was almost like I got frustrated with like a certain section or whatever. There was no frustration with Final Fantasy 15. It was like I just don't know what's going on. It was like watching the new series of Twin Peaks, like the years later. I got like 3 episodes into that and just switched it off because I was like, I don't know what's going on. I have no interest.
Yeah, or like when you're in another country and someone starts talking to you in a language you don't speak, and you're like, I'm never going to see this person again. Like I could just walk. I'm just going to walk in the opposite direction. They're not going to do anything. What are they going to do?
I know exactly what you mean. And you just go like they're like speaking German or whatever, or Spanish or French, and you just go.
Yeah, you just walk off. Like, what are they going to do? Speak more German at you?
For about a second, you're like, try and act. I'm going to act as though I know. And no, I'm out. I don't know what's going on here. I'm just leaving.
Yeah. Exactly. Well, Jonesy, the other part of this story, just talking about PlayStation and Sony and what they might actually have going on this year, beyond the never-ending mystery around God of War's release date, is equally as confusing as Square Enix's plans for Final Fantasy, which is the prospect, once again, of a Last of Us remake for the PlayStation 5, potentially in the Last of Us 2's engine. And according to Jeff Grubb, that may well actually come out this calendar year. Would you play that? For anyone listening to the podcast, that was all thinking time.
No. I've already played it on PlayStation 3, then I got it on PlayStation 4, and I I didn't finish it on PlayStation 3. I did finish it on PlayStation 4, thoroughly enjoyed it. Then PlayStation 5... No, I guess PlayStation 4, I played the second one. I don't think I'm ready to go back and like, it's not been long enough. It's not been long enough.
Which is weird because I mean, well, it actually depends. When did you play the PlayStation 4 remaster? Was it at launch?
No, it wasn't at launch. It was maybe, I don't even know, man. Maybe like 6 months after or something like that. Okay.
Because again, even that would have been 6 months later, would have been the end of 2014. So like, it's still
is a long time.
It's still. I think that's the weird thing about this is it's perhaps longer ago than people think it is, but also it feels like not quite long enough for a game like The Last of Us.
I think as well, one of the things that as we were talking about, like how you view a game in your memory. The way I view the remake of The Last of Us Part 1, I ticked a lot of those boxes with The Last of Us Part 2. So I got back into that world. The world felt very similar. And whilst it wasn't the same story, it was obviously a continuation. I don't feel, and it hasn't been that long. It hasn't felt like it's been that long since I played The Last of Us Part 2. And it is a grueling game. It's an emotional, like,
It could be exhausting.
It is exhausting. It is exhausting. And I don't think I need a couple more years before I get back into it, maybe.
Yeah. No, I do get what you mean. Although there's also a part of me that is a real cuck for not just The Last of Us in general, but projects like this that come out looking really good. And one of the things that, like, Naughty Dog always push the boundaries, and I think The Last of Us 2 was a remarkable achievement from a technical and an artistic perspective, especially considering it was running on the PS4. They never, I think they gave out a patch for The Last of Us that allowed it to run at 60 frames a second on the PS5, but they never gave it like an actual re-release. Like, you know how Death Stranding and Ghost of Tsushima got director's cuts that added new content and made them like PlayStation 5 games. The Last of Us 2 never got that. So, we've now had a couple of years almost with PS5s, and we haven't seen what one of the most envelope-pushing studios that Sony have to offer in their wheelhouse have done with that hardware. And while I think it is a little bit, it's not quite the same when it is essentially a retread of old ground. Like, if they are able to successfully take The Last of Us, put it in The Last of Us 2's engine, and push, turn everything up to 11 because it's on the PS5, then that's going to be such a pretty and fascinating way to re-experience what is still one of the best stories that, AAA action-adventure games have told in recent memory, that I feel like I won't be able to say no. I won't be able to say no.
It's funny because when you say it, like, part of me is like, could I not play it? Like, I don't think I would, but then I'm like, could I not? And I don't know if I could not. I might have to, especially when I think of some of the latter stuff which would really benefit from like an overhaul visually. And I would like to see that. Also, it markets itself. You just got to say, Joel is alive. And then there you go.
Yeah, exactly. Like, there was, everyone who really wanted to play as Joel for The Last of Us Part 2 gets their wish. And
do you know what? Will a guarantee? I wonder if they'll add in Abby in the final sort of few missions, and she'll be as a kid knocking around, and then you'll have videos of people trying to find her and shoot her in the face.
Maybe. I just thought of something else. Can we like spoil some elements of The Last of Us Part 2 at this stage?
Yeah, it's been out for ages.
But like you actually just touched on a really important issue, which is there's a character model at the end of the game, not Abby, but someone related to Abby, that if they are being like if they are more like correctly lining up with The Last of Us Part 2, there's a very significant character model that has to change at the end of that game. Right?
Not by much.
Like, not by much, but like there's a likeness that now has to be adopted by a character that in the original version was just generic.
Oh, I don't think that's even a difficult decision. You just change it.
I know, but it'd be interesting to see that work be done, because that's a character that goes from like someone that, again, is a generic NPC essentially in the first one to being a character in the second game with a face and motion capture and a voice actor and a performance, and like they have to go back and add that, replace that model. That's going to be very interesting to see.
Do you know what?
That character, and it adds new weight to doing that deed.
Oh, I see what you mean. It does, actually. It actually does. Also, I've watched too much Star Wars recently to care about that. I mean, Lucas does that constantly. I mean, yeah. He loves swapping out characters and old people and stuff for different,
You don't even know what version of the Star Wars films you're watching, relatively speaking.
No idea.
All those edits have been done over the course of the last 40 years, feels like.
So I genuinely watched a YouTube video about the updates, about what they've done, and then I watched it back and was like, oh, wow, I didn't even... Of course this isn't what it would have looked like 30 years ago. This is completely different. The CGI is basically modern. But so no, I'm down with that. I don't think there's a problem with doing that at all. I do think they could even introduce some interesting additional elements outside of that character you're talking about. Like, they could add in some extra things, maybe like cheeky little Easter eggs and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely could.
It'd be interesting to see if they mess with it in any other ways. I'm not sure if they would.
I hope not, just because I was one of the weirdos who replayed The Last of Us just before The Last of Us 2 came out, which, again, we're talking about 2 years ago now, almost to the month, and I thought it held up really well.
Right.
story pacing. Like the gameplay could be tightened up. Like I think people were like fairly critical of some of the third person shooting mechanics in the Last of Us at its release. But I thought broadly speaking it was as I remembered it to be, which was encouraging.
Okay.
And so that's why I hope they don't fuck with it too much, because it doesn't need to be fucked with.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't at all.
Yeah.
Well, with that, Jamie, I think there's one little last story just to mention, which we could probably burn through in about 2 minutes.
Yeah, probably.
Before we have to check out, and that is Techland. Are currently, and as we know, this is the preferred way for developers to reveal things these days. They are recruiting, and they are looking for some people to work on an open world fantasy action RPG, which is a previously unannounced open world fantasy action RPG that they're now recruiting for. Notably, though, some of the development team are former CD Projekt Red staff, which is quite an interesting little, I don't know, would you say like a amalgamation of a cool fantasy RPG team?
Yeah,
working with
that also just feels like a bit of Polish infighting. Like if CDPR became a slightly difficult place to work during the fallout of Cyberpunk, then if you're Techland, you just kind of start firing off some emails being like, hey, you can change jobs, come work for us, you can still live in Poland, and we'll pay you this. And I wonder if some people were just like, actually, fuck it, yeah, I'm not spending the next 2 years patching this fucking piece of shit.
I wonder if there's a weird thing that Techland were like kind of relieved when Cyberpunk wasn't just this insane, like, best thing of the last sort of like of this generation kind of game, and it did mess up a little bit because they're like, thank God, otherwise we're just going to look like the most second-rate studio in Poland. But actually, not too bad.
Well, yeah, I mean, and like they didn't completely fuck up Dying Light 2. Like Dying Light 2 was probably a little bit too like ambitious for its own good, but like at least they kind of broadly delivered what people wanted from that game in a lot of cases, at least. I actually think going more fancy action RPG is the way to go for them, because they need to get away from the idea of branching narrative storylines and we can change the world and all this. Like, just get back to the basics, keep it, make sure you can show people what you do well, and don't worry about messing around with all that crap. Like it's fine in Dying Light 2. Like, it's obviously nothing like to the degree that they initially said it was going to be. But just get back to the basics. Just make a good game that people enjoy and have fun with. Like they make worlds well. So yeah, but I like the idea that you're hearing about an open world fantasy action RPG and calling it going back to the basics when that could still be the most like overcomplicated like bullshit ever conceived. Because open world fantasy action RPGs, like you're talking about like the Skyrims of witches in the world, and they are all massive and sprawling and
but they're super basic. Yeah, but they are super basic as well. They're like they are. Oh, come on.
I don't know what you mean by basic.
Oh, like they're bread and butter. Look at Skyrim and stuff. As long as the game is written in a way that seems huge and like all encompassing, but at the end of the day is walk up to NPC, talk to NPC, pick like
stop doing this. You do this all the time when you try and be productive with games.
That's a good thing. That's a good thing though. I mean, I think it's important. You don't like it because it takes away some of the magic.
No, because it takes away the magic. Yeah, because it's like describing magic as flip card, move hand, pull out card, reveal card. Like
do you know what? As an aside,
the magic is the point.
I hate magic now. Like in general, whenever I see it on TV or whatever, I hate it because it's so obvious how the trick is done. It's so obvious. It bugs me all the time. But I quite like it when it comes to games that I don't mind that I can see how the game is made. I don't mind that I can see how the sausage is made as long as it's made well. And one of the problems you have is when you start to think there is real magic. And Techland and Cyberpunk, CDPR fell foul of this a bit. Cloud Imperium Games with Star Citizen fell foul of this a bit. They think that there is real magic and that if they just spend longer, they can make like a real world where everything will just work like actual, like it's living, it's breathing. It's like, no, it's a game. You just walk up to NPC, talk to NPC, get mission, go and do mission, do that stuff well, and then worry about the rest of the stuff. So that's what Skyrim did really well. It wasn't some magical game that was super complicated under the hood. It was like, no, it works because they did all the stuff they needed to do really well.
I think that there are programmers and like coders out there who are fucking like having an aneurysm listening to you describe anything about the development of a game like Skyrim as simple or back to basics.
Not simple. I'd say like compound complexity. Like you start with something, you just build complexity, and that's how you make, and that makes the game at the end of it like more than the sum of its parts, if you like, because you start with something simple and you build simple on simple on simple, and you get like you get very complex. I think the difference for me is that with something like Dying Light 2, or what they wanted to do with that was they started with incredibly complex and they tried to backwards work incredibly complex, and I think that is something which doesn't seem to work in game development.
Sure, okay. That I'm beginning to agree with you on that line of thinking, sure.
Whereas your Skyrims and stuff seem to be, we start with character, it's narrative, we just meet person, talk, and then the story almost builds itself, and you bring on all these adjacent storylines and stuff like. And I think that's what makes great games is compound simplicity that breeds that feeling of complexity. So I hope they keep it like that, and then they make a really cool open world fantasy RPG, of which they are currently recruiting.
And I hope that that people stop tweeting out what they're making and start turning them into stupid trailers that are developed or like made by an external studio or external company that they can send to the Game Awards or the Summer Game Fest, so I can get excited for 30 seconds and then forget about them for 3 years.
Please do that. Please do that. That's how we want to be teased. We don't want a recruitment drive or a tweet or whatever, and we also don't just want a logo. Don't just put a logo up and have people go. Meh.
I want logos. Bring back logos. Logos are better than tweets.
At the end of an in-engine trailer, that's what I want. In-engine gameplay trailer, or it doesn't have to be gameplay. Just in-engine trailer followed by a logo. That's fine. Do that.
No. Completely cinematic trailer based off like what you hope the game will look like when it comes out in 8 years' time, made by an external company, made by like a production company that's nothing to do with the development of the game.
With just logo.
Just get us excited over nothing instead of tweeting, please. Stop trying to rationalize game development. Stop trying to, try and be upfront about things. Spoil us with bullshit.
The one of the worst for that ever was probably Beyond Good and Evil 2. Like, I was so hyped for that. I was like, "Oh my god, this is like one of the greatest games I've ever seen." And then it was pure vaporware.
Yeah, we never even saw the game. I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole, but I was listening to something very interesting the other day, which was exploring the curiosity around the timing of the announcement of Beyond Good and Evil 2 and all of Beyond Good and Evil 2's big, explosive cinematic trailers with very little behind them, given the attempts that Vivendi were making at the time to acquire Ubisoft and how hard Ubisoft were fighting for their independence and their financial freedom and to not be acquired. Very interesting. ... No conspiracy. Yeah. I'm not going to put my tinfoil hat on. Make of it what you will.
That does sound very interesting. Might have to check out that. Was that a podcast you said you were listening to? Was that a podcast you heard that on, and what were you listening to it on? Oh no, I think Jamie can't hear me.
I couldn't hear you, but now I can, and I'm back in the room.
There we go. So I said, was that a podcast that you heard that on?
I can't even remember. I think I can't remember. It was just someone made an observation on the timing because obviously Ubisoft were in the news recently because like they were potentially looking at was it teaming up with like there were like private equity companies that were potentially coming in and investing in them, and that was their way of kind of like being safe from a bigger acquisition from another, like, the kind of companies that are doing a lot of acquiring at the moment. And then people were talking about how it's funny that, Vivendi were trying to acquire Ubisoft years ago, and all of a sudden Ubisoft, their catalogue of games and what they're making became bigger, and their unity became much more evident and at the forefront of all their E3 showcases. So yeah, very... but again, I don't want to put my tinfoil hat on and suggest that Beyond Good and Evil 2 was always vaporware to try and artificially inflate the value of Ubisoft and try and put off potential acquirers. That's for you to decide.
And with that is the end of the podcast. Thank you so much for joining us. Jamie, thank you for being here. Chris will be back soon. I'm not going to say next week because I'm not actually sure. We are on YouTube and Twitter at Supershow Pod. If you want to reach out to us, you can also catch us on podcasting platforms. So make sure, if you're watching us on YouTube, and you want to listen to us on a podcasting platform, like switch it up. Leave us a comment down below if you are on YouTube. I'm trying to think of a little cheeky phrase you could put in, and I can't think of one. Any ideas, Jamie?
I kind of want to take the piss out of you for trying to simplify game design, but
Simple Jonesy, there you go. If you made it to this point.
Compound stupidity.
I like that. Okay, that's good. Compound stupidity.
That's not me calling you stupid. You're a very intelligent man.
If you made it to this point in the podcast and you're on YouTube, or even if you're on a podcasting platform, head over to YouTube to post Compound Stupidity below the video, and we'll know that you watched it all the way to the end. And then you will get a virtual pat on the back from Jamie or me in your dreams, which is weird. And we'll see you next week. Thank you so much for joining us. Goodbye.
Bye.